Yes, now it is finally started recording. First of all, I want to go over and see if you have any questions for me about your assignment.
I've got a quick question.
Yes.
I'm on my iPhone, sorry. I'm
That's
heading
fine.
home. When we do our peer review, where do we need to attach that to?
There is a place under, okay, first of all, it goes in two places. One, you can put it in discussion board so that your person you reviewed can find it. The other place is under assignment Dropbox, and there will be a place that says peer review for tasks 1, 2, and 3.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Good question. All right. Any other questions?
Do we need to do 2 peer reviews or 1?
1. You only have to do 1. He changed that last semester because so many people were getting bogged down because they weren't getting their peer reviewer, and some people were behind. And so he switched it to just 1. All right. Any other questions?
Should we expect comments on our submitted document from you as well?
Yes, you should. What I think Dr. Bullis and I talked, and what he wants you to do is submit it to me first. And if you do that through discussion board, up until Thursday of last week, I was keeping up with you, but I got behind over the weekend and the first part of this week because I've had a lot of different meetings to go to. But what I do is on discussion board, I write comments. If it's following the rubric, I'll basically say, you know, this looks good, proofread carefully. If I find some things or I have a hard time finding it, then I will tell you what I can't find, or I may ask you to reorganize it to make it in the same order that the rubric is. So yes, you should expect some comments from me. And I think what Dr. Bullis wants to do is see what I say first, and then he will work with you after that. That helped. But like I said, well, actually, I think I was caught up till about Saturday, and it's been just this week that I've gotten behind. So I'm going to work on getting caught back up, but I'm not there just yet. So if you submitted it Sunday, Monday, or today, I haven't gotten it reviewed. All right, any other questions? All right, let's go ahead and look at your agenda. And I put those paradigms of ethics because at the top of your agenda for you to have as we actually go in and talk about the case study. But prior to that, I want to look at the equal employment laws related. So I'm going to share my screen and hope that for some reason, I am not hitting these right because it's not happening. There we go. So I'm choosing the screen. This is the screen of the different employment laws. Now, the reason I pull these out for you is simply because when you get into the role of a school administrator, you're going to have to be responsible to yourself for making sure that you're following all of these laws. And the first one, which is not showing up on the screen, but it's there, is the Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of '64. And this is the one that prohibits discrimination in employment by employers or employment agencies and in memberships by unions on the basis of race, color, gender, or national origin. And it was amended in '72 to include state and local governments. Then you have the Equal Pay Act of '63, which started out as the Fair Labor Standards Act of '38. So I think it's really interesting to look back and see when some of these laws started, and then how long the time was in between before it got revised. And then you have the Age Discrimination in Employment Act. And that started out to be for people in '67 who were 40 or older. And then in '74, it was extended to state and local governments, and that included school districts Then the law got changed to 65 in 78, and then in 78 it changed to 70, and then in 86 it just removed the upper age limit completely. And then you have the Rehabilitation Act of 73, and that has a section 504, which basically that there's no otherwise qualified individuals with a disability solely by reason of their disability may be excluded. Then you have your Americans with Disabilities Act of 1990, which is, you've heard of ADA often. And that one actually started out as the Rehabilitation Act of 73, and then it was changed. And then you have the Veterans Reemployment Rights Act. Now look when it first started in 1940. But then it was updated in 94 to be the Uniformed Services Employment and Reemployment Rights Act. Then you have the Immigration Reform and Control Act of 86, where it was designed to protect the employment rights of the American citizens and legal aliens, those who are actually authorized to be in the country and have a valid green card. And then you have Title IX, which probably most of you are very familiar with. Those amendments were in 72, and it was changed in 75 for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. They actually came up with regulations governing the operation of federally funded education programs. So those are some legal pieces you need to be aware of. Now in your school finance textbook on page 132, it has additional ones. If you'll look in your textbook on page 132, it has, and right now I've misplaced my textbook, but it has some additional in the table, and it just gives you a little bit of information about each one of those. I found it. But it talks about some of the others. Some of them are mentioned, but it brings out additional ones from what is in that your other textbook. It brings out the OSHA of 70, Title IV of the Educational Amendments of 72, and then the Rehabilitation Act we've already talked about, the Vietnam Era Veterans Readjustment Act, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act, Family Medical and Leave Act, and I know you've heard of that one. And then it went ahead and talked about Title VII of Section 1604, which is the Sexual Harassment Act. And in this day and age, I suspect you're dealing a lot more with that than you would like to. Because there's if you look in the papers or listen on the news media, there's somebody being charged for sexual harassment verbally or something almost every day. And I suspect you all are dealing with it in your schools as well. So do you have any comments about any of those laws? I just wanted to bring them to your attention. One of the things I try to do in part of the agenda is to pull out some of the things that I think is really important to you as you become a school administrator, so that you'll have the textbook and you'll know where to go look and all of that. But if you can just keep these things in mind, it will help you as an administrator to make sure you don't make some mistakes. And in the little introductory information that I did this week for what you're supposed to be doing starting today, going through next Monday, I mentioned another law, which is FERPA. And one of the really important things to remember about that one is students who are 18 years old, you are not to share their information, their grade information, unless they give permission to you to share it with the parents. And some people have gotten in trouble over that. So you need to make sure that you know what the law is and that you follow the law, whatever those laws are. And when you're dealing with high school kids, and most of them are 17 and there's just a few 18-year-olds, it's so easy to forget that piece. But if they've turned 18, then the parents have to get the information or the permission from the child before you can share it. Colleges do a really good job when you take the children for orientation. If you're a parent, they tell the parents up front, you need to remain on your child's good side because they're the ones that have to give you permission, or they need to share the information about their grades. We can't do that because they're 18 years old. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're at a high school and you're dealing with 18-year-olds. All right, your case study. I've got the questions here, but I'm going to share a different screen, which actually has the case study itself. And we'll probably come back to the questions in a minute. But as you looked at this case study, what was the points in the narrative that came to you and you thought, ooh, as an administrator, I should keep this in mind? What were some of the points that came to you that you felt, okay, I really need to keep this in mind?
Biases.
All right, biases. And what biases are you thinking about? What came out to you?
Well, one, it seemed as if they were wanting to give him preferential treatment because he had a relative that had influence with the school. And so you find out a lot with parents. They feel because of their influence with the school that they should be able to kind of get around some things.
All right, that's a good point. What else did you find that could be one of the things that a principal would really need to know?
Just kind of bouncing off what she said about being biased. The kid's an athlete. And so sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes athletes are treated a little differently and are given other opportunities that some students might not receive. But I mean, as a coach, I view that as, you're a student athlete. You're a student before you're an athlete. And so shouldn't be treated any differently.
And the other part is there are some teachers that I've known who make it harder on athletes because they have the reverse bias. And I'm sure you've run across it too, because your players have probably talked to you about that. With hopefully you've not, but I've seen it. There are those that do that. So it's just important to know both sides. What else came out that you think, okay, something is not quite right here?
Well, one of the things I noticed, if I was interpreting it correctly, I thought that they said that the project or the grade for the project was for half of that. It was for half of that class or something of that nature. I just thought that was kind of awful high for one project to cause with 50% of students' grades. So that was the thing that I noticed about the teacher with her grading for one project. I thought that was awful high. That's just me.
Well, I agree with you, David. I really think it was very high. And now when you get to college, you may not have but a few assignments throughout the year. And you might expect this kind of thing. But at the high school level, you should have enough assignments that one assignment is not going to completely fail a student. But apparently, this one assignment could fail this student. So you brought out a really important point, because what's the principal's job?
To ensure that teachers are grading fairly.
All right. The principal's job, if you think about the first thing we looked at last week, is to grade and classify students. They generally allow that to be done by the teacher. But suppose a teacher does something that they think is not quite right for the student, then sometimes they do have to step in. And, the first thing they would want to do is have a question session with the teacher and say, why did you do this? Why is this one assignment so much of the grade? Because it's almost like it's a catch-you. And it may have been meant to help the student, because if they've done a really good job on it and they hadn't plagiarized anything, then it would have really helped everybody. So you need to know what the teacher's thinking is, but this is also the downside of, okay, this is a problem here we've got to deal with.
Could that fall back into, like when we had the days of the research project, it was a make or break grade, but it was multi-step
Yes.
along the way. So when they got to the end grade, it was still a huge portion, but it was pieced together to make that grade.
Well, and that's sort of the way that this whole class is set up. You know, each one of their tasks is graded. So we give you feedback and grade it again, and then you put it together, and that's when it's sent to the final evaluator. So every one of the pieces, it's not going to kill you, you know, and you have an opportunity to fix it. So yes, that's a good point. There would be nothing wrong with a project like this if there were multiple steps and each step got graded. And if that had occurred, it's very possible she'd have picked up on the plagiarism before it became a make or break you. All right, was there anything else that you felt that the administrator should be aware of?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you're a new administrator, you better know your school's handbook.
Yes.
So,
Good.
And then this could be an opportunity where you sit down with some of the teachers and the other administrators, and maybe you may have to revamp it a little bit.
Well, and especially if you were not there when these decisions were made.
Yeah.
You have a totally different philosophy. Then you need to, you've got, at the end of the day, you've got to feel that the child's being treated fairly, regardless of who it is, and that the teacher understands your viewpoint, whether they like it or not. So is there anything else that comes into your mind about main points in the narrative?
Liability stood out to me. It kind of goes off of what I believe Wayne just mentioned regarding the student code of conduct book. It mentions that the principals told that Bobby and his parent had signed a letter indicating they knew what was in it. So realistically, I mean, Bobby has kind of forced the principal's hand. He knows what's done. There's no liability because he was so well aware of it. And on top of it, that uncle who is a Board of Education member, a true Board of Education member, should be focused on policy and not individual instances.
And that is correct. But how many of them do you know that that's their total focus?
No, it's not.
But you're right, Anthony. You're exactly right. That should be their focus, is on policy. But too often, many of them want to get bogged down in the day-to-day, and rather than let the hired professional people run the school. But the liability piece, the fact that they did sign it. But the other question I would, and I often play devil's advocate, so just realize that. The other thing is, if you send something home at the first of the year and the parents and the students sign it, are they going to remember everything that they signed by the end of the year?
Nope.
I mean, you know, you just have to realize that these are kids. And yeah, they know plagiarism is wrong. But at the same time, you know, what do you say that he was so busy? Where was it? He was so busy that he just did not have an opportunity to do his assignment, so he used his brothers. Is that what it was?
Yes.
They tried to blame it on sports, and as a coach, that is a no-fly zone at our school. Every coach that I work with will tell the kids point blank, academics before athletics.
Yes, and you're exactly right. That's what good coaches do. And a lot of coaches, I've known a lot of coaches to have a time before practice where they have their students sit down and work on homework, and if they're having trouble, they'll help them. You know, when my kids were in high school, one of mine was having a little bit of trouble understanding geometry, and he did not play sports, but he was a manager for one of the teams, and the coach sat down and helped him because he was a math teacher. And he sat down and helped him, and he said, "Mom, he really explained it to me, and it makes perfect sense now." And so I know coaches do those things, and they have time spent to do that, or often will plan for that. And if a kid will just ask, they will help them. All right, anything else we need to look at?
As a coach, I coached high school baseball this year. We had our players sign a code of conduct before the season to hold them accountable. But I mean, the head coach would go to bat for any player. I mean, we had our discipline problems and stuff, but this one's kind of extreme, and this could fall under the code of conduct to kind of go along with the handbook, kind of as a reminder of the parent agreement too at the beginning of the year.
You're exactly right. It would be under code of conduct. And so that's a real good point. All right, anything else here? All right, when question 2 is very closely related, what are your issues? You've got 2 or 3 main issues. What are the main issues with this particular case?
I guess
That it's not a code of conduct. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Blair. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Blair.
No, you're good. So I was going to say that there's not a code of conduct or a district policy already in place for these circumstances.
Okay. All right.
I think to elaborate on that, since there's not anything set in place, anything that the principal does kind of sets a precedent, and it can be a very dangerous precedent depending on what they do.
You're exactly right. The principal's not going to be, either he's not going to be liked by the community, he's not going to be liked by the parents, or he's not going to be liked by the teacher. So, you know, it opens up a problem that this particular school and district have, in that while they've got I guess that agreement that they signed could be sort of a code of conduct, it's not real clear how to handle these situations, especially with one assignment counting so heavily. So, you know, that's what often when I was a school administrator at the central office, the things that we got were things that you would think, okay, why was this not caught first? Where is the common sense? And I see both sides. Why cannot both sides give and take a little bit? It shouldn't have gotten to me. And so, you know, when it gets to that level, you know that no one's going to be happy regardless. And you're going to give the illusion of either not supporting the teacher, or that you're doing this kid preferential treatment. It's not a good place to be, regardless of what you do. But these are the kinds of things that happen in administration. And you go back to what we looked at earlier, which was the role of the principal, which is to grade and classify students. And then the other part was the ethics, if I can find that one. And this is where it comes in with justice, care, critique, and professionalism. So those are the pieces that are playing a part here.
I have a question.
Yes.
So you said that it doesn't have a code of conduct, but doesn't the teacher quote as part of the school's policy to maintain standards? The
Yes.
failing grade may by
Yes.
the teacher. So is that not code of conduct if it's in the student handbook?
It should be. Yes, it would be, depending on how it's phrased and what it's labeled as. But yes, it should be that. You're correct.
Because I mean, in the case study, that's a direct quote there. So I'm curious what you said they were in the code of conduct. When I read it, it's already codified in their student handbook that plagiarism was a fillable offense.
Yes, and that is correct. And in most of your codes of conduct, it's multiple pages of all kinds of things, and plagiarism would be one of them. There would also be things about actions. So yes, that's a good point that it's there. So I think I was thinking more of ethics than the code of conduct. All right, anything else that we need to look at with issues? All right, the next question is actually one of the issues too. While Bobby did wrong, should one assignment in high school or middle school cause a student to fail for the entire year?
I don't think one assignment should cause a student to fail for a whole year.
What about some of the rest of you?
I agree. It shouldn't be a single assignment make or break.
No, I don't think it should be, but because they didn't clarify anything, that kind of throws mud in the water. But yeah, I don't think one assignment should be the thing that determines if a child passes or not.
Then release with the opportunity to redo it.
And that's if well, let's see, you all are too young to have gone through. There was some state policy at one point in time that encouraged people to put students on contracts and would allow them to, this was more for at-risk students, would allow them to redo and improve their grades because so many were failing and not able to stay in school. And so I don't remember what it was called, but it had a name, and it was one of the focuses to try to keep kids in school. And I'm going to say that was around the early 90s, maybe even a little bit before that or a little bit after. So there is, you brought out some important points to allow them to redo the assignment. And I think a lot of times that's what a teacher would do. They'd say, okay, I'm giving you a 0 on this. I want you to redo it, and then I will increase your grade to, if you could just give them
Partial credit.
part of a partial credit, you'd get it to a point where they could pass. But the real issue is, if that brings a whole nother question. It is, what's failing? Does it have to be a 0? And I know there's been policies on that, and some school boards have passed policies that the lowest grade that you can give is a 50, because 0 will completely, a student will work forever to try to pull a 0 up. And I don't know whether they're still in existence. A lot of teachers fought those and did not like those. But I think they did it, and it was passed by school boards. And I think they did it more or less to try to get to where students could at least get to a D. They were not trying to improve their grade to the point that they'd be an A student, but they were just trying to get them to where they could stay in school and get to a D. I don't know whether they still do that, but I know that occurred in several different school districts, because I saw it when I would go to various meetings and I would hear people talking about what they were doing to try to keep to lower the dropout rate, because those were all things that they were doing to lower the dropout rate.
But Dr. Todd,
yes,
let me ask you a question on that, because I do I think we have the incidents where teachers get upset because they have to keep a student grade, can't give them a 0, and I do understand that. But I think, to me, what's the balance for that? If you do that, that means you have to give them a lot more assignments. Because if you do one thing, and I do understand from a teacher aspect, then you can't give 4 grades or 5 grades for the whole year and then say, hey, this kid get a 0, then they won't have a chance.
You're exactly right. And that's the reason some of these systems have passed that as the lowest grade you can give is a 50. Because otherwise and it's not your top students that this is going to help. It's usually the students that are already in trouble, and you're just trying to get them to hang on by a thread and keep them in school. And that's why it falls under dropout prevention. But you brought out a really good point, that, when you do give them a 0, you do have to have a whole lot more assignments in order for them to even get to a D, a passing grade. Because, with 4 grades, if you had 3 hundreds and a 0, what's the average going to be? It will be passing, but it won't be that high, so that's just one of the things that you have to deal with. And so that's one of the things that I think, if you wind up in a school where teachers have this information and they have this attitude, I think that you're going to want to have to ask them You know, what is your purpose in giving a 0? What is your purpose in giving so many assignments? Now, will that make them like you? Heavens, no, they're not going to like you at all, because they're going to look at you and say, oh, they're interfering in the way I teach my class. They're not allowing me to be the professional. But you have to remember what the principal's job is. You know, you're there in loco parentis. That's another term that's used in school law. You're there in the absence of the parent, and your job is to look after the students and make sure they're being treated fairly. Yes, you want to work with your staff, but you need to, if you inherit a school where this is going on a lot, you need to have conversations with your teachers about why they're grading as they are and the purpose behind the really low grades. Now, I'm going to give you an example. I actually dealt with this, but I didn't, at the time I was going through it, I didn't really think about it in the same ways that we're thinking about it now. I went to a school as a principal, and I noticed that when I looked at their grades from the first 9 weeks, there were so many Fs. And so I started, and I don't recommend this as a way to gain favor with anybody, but I started calculating the percentages of Fs that the teachers were giving. And I just wrote them a little note, and I said, I noticed that this student, and I mean, this was the first 9 weeks. So I said, I noticed that a certain percentage of your students are failing. And then I would say, you know, let me know what's your reason behind all of this. Well, it was amazing to me how much better the students performed the second 9 weeks, because the teachers didn't like that question from me. And, you know, we did have discussions about what does a grade mean? And that's one of the next questions. What's the purpose of grades? Do grades mean the same thing to each teacher? And what should grades tell a student and a parent? So that's all mixed in together. And when you did your research class, I'm hoping that you all talked about this. So this should be a review. But what's the purpose of a grade?
So it's kind of ironic that we had this question with the case study, because my big focus of task 2 has been kind of on the failing grades and addressing the wild variability of one grade for one teacher to another grade for another teacher. I personally do mastery-based grading using state standards, breaking down the I can statements, and that's how they prove it to me. So I do give zeros. If you don't show that you've reached mastery, you don't pass yet. But the key word in that is yet. So I frequently have students who review, reassess, you know, they come back for tutor sessions, whatever the case may be, and a day, a week, a month, in many instances, they come back and say, I now understand it, Mr. Johnson, I'd like to reassess. They prove that they have mastered the material, and I change that grade from a 0 to the 100 that proved that they showed mastery.
And that is really the way that contract grading or mastery learning should be going. You know, when they don't have it, you don't give them credit for it. But when they work on it and they come back, you reassess them, you know they've got it. And that's there's nothing wrong with that, because you're not trying to catch them with a 0. And I think that the school systems that have passed where the lowest grade you can give is a 50, is they were seeing kids being caught by the 0 to where they could not improve their grade. But, you know, the teachers had never looked at the fact that the Fs were really contributing to their students giving up. And that's exactly what the students were doing. When they were getting so many Fs, they just quit. And so their grades didn't improve throughout the rest of the year. But when the teachers started looking at what they were doing, then they did some reassessments themselves and thought, okay, maybe I need to relook how I'm doing this. And sometimes it was just the students didn't turn the work in. Well, there's not anything you can do about that except to try to get them to do the work. And if they don't, then yes, they're justified because they haven't done their part. But a lot of them would rather take the 0 than to let the teacher know what they didn't know, if that makes any sense. And so, you know, you teachers have to really get to know the students in order to try to help them. And you mentioned something about do the grades mean the same thing? And you mentioned that no, they really don't, because one teacher has a lot of this in it. You know, some teachers will give credit for effort. Some teachers will give an effort grade. So, you know, when you send a grade home without talking with the parent and the child, what does that grade tell the parent and the child about their work in your class?
I would say that it, depending on the grade, it either demonstrates to them that they truly have mastered the concept, or there may be something that they're missing. So if I've got somebody who's made a 100 on some assignment, they understood all of it, versus somebody who made an 85 on it, they're missing something, but they understood the majority of it, enough to do well.
Right. And you make sure your students know how you're counting homework assignments and how you're counting effort and all of those things. You have to make sure that everybody knows and can explain to their parent what that grade means. With so many teachers having different ways of looking at things and different things that they count in their grades, it's really hard for a parent to know what the grade actually means unless there's a discussion with it. And if there's a discussion with it, then they understand. But generally, like Nick said, if they've got an 85, then they're pretty knowledgeable. If they've got 100, then they know that topic. They know that assignment. But that's something that you really have to think about and work with, and really understand what, you know, the grade should tell parents that my student is doing okay, or he's doing really well, or he's got a lot that he needs to improve. And then between the parent and you as well, work to try to help that child improve. All right, the thing that occurred in there that I found real interesting was when the teacher came to meet with the principal, instead of coming by herself and saying, I really need to talk with you about this particular issue, she brought a union rep. So why do you think a teacher would make a decision to bring someone with her for a meeting with the principal? I mean, you know, whenever I had issues with my principal, I just went and sat down and said, I need to talk to you a minute. May I sit down and talk with you? And I went over my concerns, and he would tell me what his concerns were, and I would leave understanding where he was coming from. And then either I felt like I could deal with it, or I felt like, okay, this is one we're going to disagree on. And then I would tell him, you know, I don't agree with you, but I will do what you asked me to do. So, you know, why would a teacher do that the first time that something like this occurs?
Well, there could be two ways to look at it. One, either this isn't the first time this has been an issue before, or second, the teacher already knew that they had a relative on the school board and they want to be prepared to go to bat to protect them the best way possible.
That's a good point. Very good point, both of them. How many of you would call NCAE to go with you on a simple meeting with the principal that had nothing to do with your employment? Would any of you? Wouldn't you try meeting with the principal first and then bringing the NCAE rep to help you when it got to the point of your employment? That's when you want them. You know, you really need them then. And you know, you don't and most principals and school administrators expect you to have a representative. Anytime that I knew that I was going to have to look at termination of a teacher, I would encourage them to bring someone to look after them. Even when I had to write letters of reprimand to go in their personnel file, I would tell them, I want you to write a written response, because your written response needs to be attached to my letter of reprimand so that there's a record of what you did and why. And you know, most of them would do that. I even had to do one time for a janitor, and I told him, I said, you know, I will write your letter of response to go in this, as long as you tell me what you want me to write. Because there are certain times that you as an administrator have to put something in the personnel file, and that was something I had to do. But it was a good employee, and he did a good job most of the time. He just did something really stupid. And so that's why I wanted him to tell me, and I was willing to get it typed for him. Now, you don't always feel that way about them, but you will find some situations where you have to do something by school policy or the school state law, and you know this is a good employee, and you want them to respond to it because they probably had a purpose or something, or they just didn't think that day. So, you know, there's always ways to look after people, even when you're having to do your job. I actually had one person that chose to resign one time, and it was over an issue that a relative had accused him of something. I never did believe it, but he chose to resign, and he said, Dr. Todd, I appreciate the way you treated me. You always treated me professionally and kind. And he said, most people would not have done that. So I think that's one of the things that I would like for you to remember when you become a principal. Be compassionate when you're doing the things that you don't want to do anyway, but you have to because of the way the laws are written. Show some compassion and at least be kind. There's nothing that says that you have to be ugly when you do something about a letter of reprimand, or even when you have to bring it to their attention that charges are being filed against them by someone. So, you know, you can do things in a kind manner, and people will remember you for that as much as they will remember what happened to them. So this teacher may have had some bad experiences with school administrators before. That's another possibility. So, you know, we just are not real sure why she did that, but that was something that occurred. All right, after examining all the issues related to the situation, what should the principal's course of action be? And I said to consider the legal issues of due process and the standards of arbitrary and capricious. And let me see if I can find that particular one. Yes, this one. These were the ethics. And what gives the principal the legal authority to make a decision regarding a student's grade? And are you seeing the shared screen that says critique and profession on it? Or are you seeing it? What are you seeing?
See the reading still.
All right. All right. Let's see if this is the right one. Are you now seeing the critique and profession? Okay. All right. Those were the parts that you were asked to think about. So after looking at all of these and thinking about what happened, thinking about the relative who's a school board member, thinking about the teacher who can make your life very difficult in your school if you don't support her, what should the principal's decision be? It's not an easy answer. And there's really no right and wrong.
Would the suggestion of the alternative assignment or redo be the acceptable approach here versus the blanket? I don't think you're not going to give them a failing grade.
That would certainly be an appropriate approach, is to say, let's come up with an alternative assignment. Let's allow this student, because you have so few grades, let's allow this student an opportunity to pass. You know, once you talk with the teacher about why she did it the way she did and had one assignment to count so much. As one of you suggested, if you wanted to leave the assignment and count partial assignments up to that point and the whole thing counted as the big thing, as the big project, that would be a possibility too. What else might you look at doing as you talk with this teacher and these parents?
Make sure the the teacher's on board with that, and then I would even bring in the school board member, have him, the teacher, the dean discuss it, and afterwards you're going to have to revamp the handbook. 0 with an opportunity to make up for partial credit. If it happens again, administrator's discretion. You're going to have to kind of word it in that way so a situation like this doesn't happen again.
And that's a very good suggestion. Anybody else have a suggestion?
Yeah, I would absolutely recommend that addressing the assignment and the weight of the assignment, giving an alternative to that is a good option. However, plagiarism is a crime, so needless to say, there needs to be disciplinary action.
That's correct.
I would recommend some type of suspension, as well as suspension, if not a complete removal from the baseball team. Because when I used to coach, if I found out one of my players were cheating in their classes, they were gone. I would not stand for that, and the school shouldn't stand for that either.
And I think that's another good possibility of what could be done, and still allow the child to pass for that particular year and not keeping from passing completely. Suspension is a possibility. It doesn't have to just be, and would that make the teacher feel better? I don't know. You would have to know your employees to know whether that would make the teacher feel good that you had supported her, because you want your teacher to feel supported, but at the same time, you want to make sure that the student is getting a fair shake, even though they did something wrong, they admitted they did something wrong. You still have to look at the whole picture. That's a good question.
In that instance, wouldn't not giving any actual disciplinary action and giving the student an alternative option to make up the assignment, doesn't the student kind of get off completely scot-free, again, setting a precedent for future incidents like that?
They would. And so your suggestion of an alternative disciplinary action is a better situation than just giving them a free rein to redo the assignment. And I probably would have always given them a punishment first. And then if I allowed them to make it up, I would let them make it up, but you would have to do your punishment first.
And that's the thing too. I think a lot of us seems like our coaches. You'd have to bring the coach in too.
Yes.
If the coach is going to sit them out, maybe a few games until they make up the assignment, and they're making it up in school suspension or whatever it is. All that stuff kind of has to come together. You have to bring and make sure the teacher's on board with it, the coach is on board with it, and you change up that policy so then everybody knows that this is how we're going to do things the following year. Not automatically a 0, and then now we have problems with failures.
That's right. But you're exactly right. Coach should be part of it. Sometimes, actually, when I was a principal, I would go to my coach if we were having some issues with a particular student, and I knew they were on the team, and he would be most supportive, and between the two of us, we could get things straightened out. And the students would turn around for coaches when they wouldn't turn around for the teachers a lot of times. So that's a good point. Anything else under what should the principal do? All right, what gives the principal the legal authority to make a decision regarding a student's grade? We went over it last week. I mentioned what?
General statute that gives
general
them.
Statute, yes. The general statute that says that the principal is assigned to grade and classify students. All right, the 4 paradigms we mentioned, justice, care, critique, and profession. And so as you think about this case, which of the issues are involved?
I would say all of them are.
To some extent, you're correct. You know, what is fairness? What's equitable? What's justice? You don't have to look at all of them, but, you know, just pulling out some of them. Concern and connection under care. Critique, did the student do something wrong? Yes, they did. And then under professionalism, is it in the best interest of the students? So there's something under each one of them that would actually, of those 4 paradigms that Dr. Lamb mentioned, that would fit with this particular case. If you were going to create a short PowerPoint to address questions 6 and 7, which were on, which were about the course of action of the principal and the paradigm of ethics, what would you include? What would you include in information for a short PowerPoint to present to your group?
Information on the law.
Okay. The law. What else?
I would include those 4 paradigms and which area that is effective within those.
Okay. Anything else?
And possible resolution.
Okay. And would you point out the way that the different resolutions could be looked at?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add to that, or a different thought?
Would it be worth noting the current policy that the teacher is citing?
Yes, it would. And it would be worth noting that the students signed it and the parents did too. So it's definitely a violation, which would open up that you needed to punish them in some way. So, you know, the biggest, you know, if the teacher, the only issue with the teacher was that this one assignment could cause the student to fail, and it's at the high school level. If it's at the college level, often you don't have but 2 or 3 main assignments, and a lot of those will be papers. But when it is at the high school level, usually there's expected to be more than 1 major assignment that's going to cause a student to fail. That is really the only issue that the teacher has, is just the fact, and that really muddies the water in one sense of the word, because you clearly have them for plagiarism. They've clearly made a violation. But if the teacher had thought through it and tried to figure out a way to keep this one assignment from failing the student, then you wouldn't even have an issue. It would be resolved in the classroom, and it would never be brought to your attention. So, you know, I would, you know, look at all of those kinds of things. Anything else that you would put in your short PowerPoint? All right, have you had similar issues like this to happen in your school that you're aware of?
We have a world history teacher who does a project that's 30% of her students' grades, and every semester she has an extremely high failure rate, and a lot of it has to do with her projects.
Okay.
So I have actually seen this problem show up before.
Okay. Anybody else? Well, hopefully this case study has just given you all some information to think about, and when you change roles, you have to look at it in a different perspective. You know, one of the things that I always tried to do was I always tried to see the teacher's perspective, but then I also remembered that I needed to look at the fairness issue for the student and what was best for the student in the long run. You know, should the student be punished? Absolutely. The student should be punished. Should they be failed for the entire year over one assignment? I have problems with that, and I think probably most of you do too. So those are issues that you wind up, and I will tell you that sometimes as a school administrator, when I would have these situations happen and somebody would come to my office and tell me what they were dealing with, I would go to my assistant superintendent and I would say, where is their brain? You know, what were they thinking? I wouldn't say it to the person there, but he and I would talk and I would say, okay, why am I seeing this differently from what they're looking at? And we had that free exchange of discussion, and he'd say, okay, Barbara, this is the way you were brought up. They're not looking at it that way. And this is the way I was brought up. They're not looking at it that way. So, you know, you need somebody you can really trust when you're in school administration, but you have to know that you can trust them. Too many times people will try to use people, especially you, and say things that you've said because they think you're your friend. So you need to be really, really careful about that. All right, the next question I have, and we're just about to the end, what should guide the principal's decision? What should guide the principal's decision?
What's in the best interest of the students?
What is in the best interest of the student?
Yeah.
All right. Do y'all have any other thoughts or comments related to this case?
I guess the only thing I wanted to maybe ask you, Dr. Todd, so is it fair, what if the principal just maybe like at the beginning of the year set the grading standards or the percentages for all of his teachers? How is that taken away from them, and that way you won't have a situation like this, or should we let teachers get a teacher to come in and, I mean, do the principal go over everybody's syllabus or anything like that? I mean, how does that work?
I'm going to tell you that you're not going to have time to do that.
Right.
You're going to have so many things hitting you at one time. But I think what you can do is to talk with your teachers and say, you know, these are issues we've noticed before. We need to make sure we're all on the same page. You know, what is the purpose of grades? Is it to catch students, or is it to give us an idea of what they know? That's where you start your conversation. And then you say, you know, I would like for you to make sure you have enough assignments that if a student does something stupid and they fail an assignment, that they can still pass the course. And, you know, I think you win a lot by having conversations before anything happens. And a lot of times you can find information as you look back at, if you go in as a new principal, you look back at the handbook that was previously used, you might find some things that you think, okay, we really need to have a conversation about this. But I can tell you, you will not catch them all. And you will always wonder, okay, why did I not see this before? But I don't think you're going to have the time to go through everybody's syllabus. I always had my teachers to share with me what they planned on covering for each 9 weeks. I had them give me an outline, and I did look at them. But I didn't look at the day-to-day assignments, and I didn't look at anything like that. I looked at what they were covering and whether it matched. At that point in time, it's called a standard course of study for North Carolina. And if it matched, then I never said anything about it. And with the grading issues, what I realized is my teachers wanted those children to do better than what most of the people in the community thought they could do. I was at a very rural school, and there was not a lot of expectations that a lot of students do well. And so we had to change that mindset. The teachers were hard on them because they knew they could do, but they were too hard on them because the kids didn't get it transferred that they could do it. So it was a process of 2 to 3 years to get that turned around, but we eventually got it turned around. And to give you an example, we were doing better when I left than when they first got there, with more children passing. A couple of 3 years after I left there, that particular school had 90% of their students on grade level. So I feel like that all of us, I started the process of getting the students to realize they could do better. And then people who came in behind me refined it. And that's what you want to do in a school, especially if you get a school where the kids are not performing as they should. And there's nothing that shows the kids are any different from other schools that are about your size. You know it's a mindset in the school. And so you have to do things on a gradual basis to get things turned around. And it does not happen in a year. It usually takes 4 to 5 years to really make a change. And that's one of the biggest issues that I have with all of the stuff about the No Child Left Behind and trying to change a school in a short period of time. I just don't think it can happen. Real changes in a school and real improvement in a school takes anywhere from 3 to 5 years to get it to stay, because you don't do it all of a sudden. You do it little by little by little. And so that's just, you know, that's just one of the things that I would try to do, David, is I'd try to have that conversation once I looked at the handbook and see what I noticed. And then, you know, ask the teachers, what are some of the issues that have arisen because in the past that we need to make sure we handle together. Teachers will be honest with you. And one of the things that I did at the first of the year when I went to a new school was I sat down with each teacher by themselves before school actually started. I would tell them I would have office hours and for them to call in and set up a time. And I would let them talk to me about anything. I didn't know any of them. So I would let them talk about anything that would concern them, what was concerning them about the school, the performance of the school, the way things happen. And I just listened. And they are really honest, because most teachers want to do right by kids and they want the children to learn. Matter of fact, I don't know of a single teacher that doesn't want that. So, you know, let your teachers feel totally able to express themselves in a non-confrontational way, and just listen when you first go to a school. You don't have that top opportunity after 1 year. You know, you can sit down with new people, but that first year is when you do that, and that really will help you get off to a smoother start. All right, any other questions or thoughts that we need to talk about tonight? All right, remember that Dr. Bullis is going to have your session next week. I am going to be traveling, but I'm going to be taking my laptop with me, so I will be available by phone. If I do not answer when the phone is ringing, a lot of times my phone, I won't hear it. I'll have it in my purse and I don't hear it. Leave me a voicemail and I'll call you back as soon as I can. I will be looking at night to read things, so send me an email if you need to. I hope you have a wonderful end of year for those who are still in school. For those of you who are out, I hope you're enjoying your time away from school. So have a great evening. And did this help in talking about this case study to give you an idea of the way that you all will do in your groups for case studies 2, 3, and 4? Did it help?
Yes.
My intent was to let you see how you have to talk about everything and go into depth with some of the things, and everybody has a different opinion, and there's so many different ways of looking at things, and so that when you get in your groups, you will feel comfortable doing that. So I'm hoping this was very helpful. All right, have a great end of the year, and I will stop sharing, and I will end the meeting. If anybody has a question that you want to ask, I'll just stop the recording. Does anybody need to talk with me after we stop recording? Okay, then I'll end the whole